Every gardener, whether you're brand new to the hobby or a veteran who's been elbow deep in potting mix since the Jurassic period, needs to keep one very important thing in mind: plant propagation. Because once you understand this little trick, you stop looking at plants as things you have to keep buying and start realizing they're basically a self-replicating DLC factory sitting in your garden. See, most people walk into a plant store, see a beautiful orchid, and immediately accept their fate. Well, there goes another 20 bucks. But experienced growers know a secret. Plants have been copying themselves for millions of years without spending a single cent. Long before garden centers existed, long before humans figured out what a fertilizer bottle was, plants were already running the original cloning program. And orchids, oh boy, orchids take this concept and run absolutely wild with it. Because depending on the species, these things can multiply through keikis, divisions, backbulbs, or even tissue culture if you want to get real fancy with it. Which means the plant you bought today isn't just a plant. It's potentially an entire future army of orchids waiting to happen. Believe it or not, sitting right next to aloe vera on the list of plants that double as nature's first aid kit is ginger. And this weird little spicy root is way more useful than most people realize. Because aside from making your tea taste better and bullying your sinuses when you eat sushi, ginger is packed with natural compounds that help fight bacteria, reduce rot, and encourage healing in plants. And that is exactly why today we're bringing it into the orchid world. Because when you're dealing with a fresh flower spike, especially one that's been cut or trimmed, that wound is basically a glowing, "please infect me" sign for bacteria and fungus. But a tiny bit of ginger extract can help protect the area while the plant seals itself back up. So in this case, we're going to use ginger as a natural helper for our little flower spike. Not some magical cheat code that suddenly spawns 10 orchids out of thin air, but a simple, natural way to keep things clean and give the plant a better chance to recover and keep growing. Make sure you cut the ginger into small pieces, because trying to work with a giant chunk of root is basically like trying to season food with an entire brick. Technically possible, but unnecessarily difficult. Smaller pieces give you more surface area, which means the useful compounds can release into the water much more easily. And in this case, that's exactly what we want, because we're not using the ginger as decoration. We're extracting the good stuff from it. The smaller the pieces are, the faster they break down, and the easier it becomes for those natural antibacterial and antifungal compounds to mix into the solution. So don't just toss the whole thing in there like you're making soup. Chop it down into manageable little bits. Your orchid spike will thank you later, and the process becomes a whole lot easier to work with. But we're not stopping there, because ginger alone is already useful. But when you combine it with aloe vera, things start getting a lot more interesting. Because aloe isn't just that plant people slap on sunburns after realizing the sun is stronger than their life decisions. It's also packed with enzymes, vitamins, and natural compounds that help plants recover from stress and heal damaged tissue. So yes, just like the ginger, we're going to cut the aloe vera into small pieces as well. Not giant slimy slabs that look like something from an alien movie. Small, manageable chunks that are easier to work with and release all that good stuff into the mixture. Now once you've got your ginger chopped up and your aloe sliced into those small pieces, it's time to bring everything together. And by that I mean we're taking all of it, every little chunk, and loading it straight into one big container. Because the plan here isn't to stare at the ingredients and hope they cooperate. We're going to blend the entire thing together. Ginger, aloe, all of it going into the same place, so the blender can do what blenders were born to do: turn solid objects into a suspicious-looking green liquid. This step is important because blending breaks everything down and releases all those natural compounds into the mixture, instead of a few lonely pieces floating around doing absolutely nothing. You get a proper solution where all the useful stuff is actually spread throughout the liquid. Once that's done, you might look at the blender and think, great, green soup accomplished. But we're not done yet, because right now, that mixture still has all the chunky bits floating around in it. And unless your orchid suddenly developed teeth, that's not going to be very useful. So the next step is simple. Strain it all out. Now the plan from here is pretty simple. We're going to take our orchid spike and let it soak in this solution for about 10 minutes. Not an hour, not overnight, and definitely not long enough for the plant to start questioning its life choices. Just a short soak. Because what we want is to give the spike enough time to absorb some of those helpful compounds from the ginger and aloe, while also letting the natural antibacterial properties help keep the surface clean. Think of it less like drowning the plant, and more like giving it a quick spa treatment. 10 minutes is enough time for the mixture to do its job, without stressing the tissue or overdoing it. And while we wait for the spike to finish its little 10-minute spa session, that solution doesn't have to sit there doing absolutely nothing. Because the good thing about this mixture is that it can also be used for other plants around the house. All you need is a simple spray bottle. Pour some of the liquid in, and now you've got yourself a quick plant mist you can use around the garden. A light spray on leaves, stems, or even around the base of certain plants can help keep things fresh while making use of the natural compound from the ginger and aloe. Now, of course, we're not turning this into some miracle potion that instantly transforms your house into a rainforest paradise. But as a gentle, natural plant helper, it's a pretty handy way to make sure the leftover solution doesn't go to waste. After about 10 minutes, go ahead and take the spike out of the solution. Don't just leave it in there like you forgot it exists. This is meant to be a quick soak, not a long-term swimming lesson. Once it's out, set the spike somewhere clean and let it dry for a little bit. Nothing fancy here. We're just giving the surface time to air dry so the plant tissue can settle and start sealing itself back up. Think of it like letting a small cut dry before putting anything else on it. The plant just needs a moment to stabilize after the soak. From here on, we're going to set up a temporary growing station for the spike. And before anyone imagines expensive equipment and laboratory glassware, relax. This entire setup is basically a budget greenhouse made from stuff you probably already have in the kitchen. All you need are 2 cups, a small piece of foam, and just enough water to keep the environment moist. That's it. No complicated machinery. No secret gardening technology hidden in a mountain temple. Just a simple humidity setup that helps the spike stay comfortable while it tries to grow. The foam acts like a support so the spike stays in place. The water provides humidity, and the second cup works like a lid to trap that moisture inside. Suddenly, you've got a tiny greenhouse where the air stays humid and stable, which is exactly the kind of environment orchid tissue prefers when it's recovering and trying to develop new growth. So with just 2 cups, a piece of foam, and a little bit of water, you've basically built a mini climate chamber for your orchid spike. Not bad for something that costs about the same as a snack from a vending machine. After about 4 weeks, you should start seeing the first signs of growth. Maybe a tiny bud forming, maybe a small bump along the spike, something subtle that tells you the plant is waking up and deciding to try again. And this is the moment where a lot of people get surprised, because what used to look like a completely useless flower spike suddenly starts showing signs of life. The plant is slowly redirecting its energy and experimenting with new growth points. It's not going to explode into a full orchid overnight. This isn't a video game where you press a button and instantly spawn a new plant. But give it those few weeks in a stable, humid environment, and you'll start seeing the early signals that something is happening. And once those little growth signs appear, once that spike finally decides to stop pretending it's decoration and actually turns into a young plant, the rest of the process becomes surprisingly normal. Because setting up the growing conditions for this new orchid is pretty much the same as taking care of any other orchid in your collection. Give it a small pot with a handful of pine bark, something loose and airy so the roots can breathe instead of sitting in soggy sadness. Orchids are epiphytes after all. They like airflow around the roots, not mud. Then place it somewhere with good light, stable humidity, and decent airflow. Nothing extreme, nothing dramatic, just the usual orchid comfort zone. Basically the same spot where the rest of your orchids are already living their best lives. And that's really it. No secret ritual, no complicated plant wizardry. Just normal orchid care from here on out. Once the spike has successfully turned into a baby plant, you treat it like any other orchid. Pine bark, proper light, steady care, all that good stuff. And from this point on, you want to lightly water it on a regular basis, sometimes even daily depending on how dry the environment is. Because young orchids and fresh roots don't enjoy turning into crispy noodles. Now, this doesn't mean flooding the pot like you're trying to recreate the Amazon rainforest indoors. Just a light watering to keep the bark slightly moist. Remember, pine bark drains quickly, which means moisture comes and goes faster than in normal soil. And honestly, watering regularly is something you'd be doing anyway if you want the plant to actually stay alive. Orchids aren't magical decorations that run on hope and good intentions. They still need water, light, and a bit of attention. Well, there you have it. What started as a simple leftover flower spike just went through a whole process. Ginger, aloe, a blender incident, a tiny greenhouse made out of cups, and 4 weeks of plant patience. And if everything goes well, that little spike that most people would normally throw away can eventually turn into an entirely new orchid plant. Which means the next time your orchid finishes blooming, you might want to look at that spike a little differently before sending it to the compost bin. Because in the world of plants, sometimes what looks like the end is really just the start of the next generation. Now, if you enjoyed this little botanical experiment, and you want to see more weird, useful, and occasionally questionable plant tricks like this, go ahead and hit the like button so the algorithm knows we're out here doing plant science with kitchen appliances. And if you want more orchid guides, propagation experiments, and general plant chaos showing up on your screen, consider subscribing as well. Because there's a lot more plant nonsense coming in the future, and trust me, some of it gets even stranger than this. Until next time, take care of your plants, and your plants might just surprise you.